Distinguished guests, welcome to this panel that is dedicated to doing business in North Macedonia, with a special focus on competitiveness, finance and regulatory framework of the Macedonian business sector. Within this panel, I will have the honor to listen to expert opinions, suggestions and future recommendations for the promotion of the business sector from the Minister of Justice of the Republic of North Macedonia, Mr. Bojan Maricic, who is about to arrive. Then Mr. Kocho Andjushev, CEO of Braco Ferroinvest Group. Then Mr. Svetozar Janevski, CEO of M6 Investments Group. Mr. Gligor Bishev, CEO of Sparkasse Bank. And we will have online Mr. Mihailo Vesovic, Director for Strategic Analysis from the Chamber of Commerce of Serbia. Since our first speaker is Mr. Bojan Maricic, and he will join us as soon as he arrives, we will proceed with the next speaker. Mr. Kocho Andjushev has been present in the business sector for many years now, both locally and internationally, and involved in continued construction of national and international dimensions of his own business. And he has been permanently involved in introducing innovations, both in methodologies of developing the managerial potential of his companies and also in terms of modern techniques to promote his export potential, the export potential of his businesses. I would like to give you the floor now and to hear your expert opinion on key techniques that have given the major contribution to improving the competitiveness of your businesses and, of course, the challenges that you had to face in this process. You have the floor, Mr. Andjushev. Thank you. Mr. Nakov, dear guests, I will try to keep within the time limits that I was given, 5 to 6 minutes. It's probably too little for me to say everything in response to the question, but I will try to cover the key elements. I'm not an expert on everything. I will speak about the industry I work in. It's technology, engineering, power energy, and there you cannot speak of industrial capacity if you are not export-oriented, because Macedonia is a very small market and you cannot speak of industrial capacity without export. 95% is export-oriented in my companies. Currently, I'm present in 42 countries, and this is where I draw my experience from in terms of being competitive, because if you want to sell internationally, you need to be competitive. You need to be a little bit more competitive from other developed countries, because you are entering those markets with negative predisposition coming from a developing country. For instance, if you have a car coming from Germany, fully equipped, already you are in advantage. Or if the power plant is coming from Austria from the very start, they are in advantage, and you need to be better than them if you want to sell internationally. You may like it or not, but this is how it is, and you need to accept it as a fact, and you need to fight in these circumstances. So in short, if you want to be competitive, you need to meet 4 prerequisites. The first one is that you need to have the state-of-the-art technology. In order to have the state-of-the-art technology, there are again 2 preconditions. The first one is to have financial means necessary to buy the state-of-the-art technology, otherwise you cannot be competitive. And the second precondition is you have 3 sources of financing, whether the the funds of the company itself, funding from banks, and you need to make the bank realize which are these processes that will make increase competitiveness. And the third thing is for you to have sources from grants and subsidies within the law on finances for investments in the state. These are the three sources, then funding sources that you can use. And I think that these sources, both the bank and the law on financial support, must have better understanding when new equipment and new technologies are acquired. Otherwise, you will lose competitiveness. And once you enter this maze of competitiveness, this maze takes you to a closure, because you will deceive yourself all the time that you are actually doing something, and actually one day, eventually, you will not be aware when where your expenses have consumed this March, and you will be out of competition and you won't be able to return again. So you need to recognize this. The first precondition is to have the state-of-the-art technology, and the sources for this technology are the ones that I mentioned. The banking system in Macedonia needs to recognize project funding, not mortgage financing, because if you let your factory mortgage to the bank, neither the bank nor you will know what to do with that factory. Then, secondly, all these funding mechanisms need to understand a little bit more that when you buy, one buys technology, it is important to support them. We have created an innovation fund in the country, but this fund turned into a funding facility for micro and small enterprises. But we forget, which is good, but we forget that micro and small companies do not bring to increased competitiveness. It is the large companies that do this. This is why we need to introduce innovation technologies for larger companies. For instance, the hydrogen car that we have produced was not assisted in any way, as opposed to other similar cases around the world. So you are a country which is not competitive. You need to struggle with competition. We have, for instance, the Rasco company is a competitor, and the Rasco company receives $3 million for the development of the hybrid car, while we have an agreement with the faculty of machinery in Skopje, an agreement of 300,000 euro. So we cannot fight with such a competition without support. This is a small country, a small market, and you cannot create an industry only for this small market unless it is something for a wider consumption. Secondly, the second precondition is the know-how. You need to have a know-how in the company. You need to have engineers. So out of 2,000 staff, 150 are engineers of different profiles depending on the production area. I have engineers, IT engineers, machinery, and so on and so forth. They're around 30, an average of 30 years of age. They have come back from the first 100 world universities, world ranking universities. They have come back to the country, and they are the only ones that can create the hydrogen car or other inventions. Unless you have such profile of people, you cannot succeed. You need to have, therefore, the know-how. Then the third component is that you need to have an adequate leadership within the company, because even if you had the whole state-of-the-art technology, the best staff, you won't succeed without this third component. And the fourth component, or third precondition, is that you need to have an aggressive marketing out of the country where you will be able to present your advantage. And again, Here, in the first part, the state can and the institutions can give their support, but in the second part, the state cannot help, cannot do anything, because you are the one that need to create the stuff. In the third element, in terms of leadership, again, the state cannot do anything for you. But as far as the market is concerned and the presentation of the product is concerned, the state can indeed do something for you. If you see the funds that we have available in our country for presentation and marketing, they are ridiculous. So these are the two components where the society and state can help in supporting competitiveness of companies. All the other things are a task that companies need to carry on.
Mr. Angushev, in regard to the Holy Trinity about competitive competition and having managers with applicable knowledge, skills, the business leaders, then owning legislation that would support the competitiveness and having continued and consistent financial support of the investments. In which ones do you see greatest challenges when it comes to building the competitiveness of your businesses at the moment and prospectively in the future when the economic chapters for EU accession are open? In all of them, literally in all of them. In all the areas you mentioned, I already said this in my initial presentation. I don't want to repeat myself. We shouldn't leave the homework to be done by somebody else. We should do our own homework. And our homework is organizing the company, the leadership, how you're going to organize the staff. Education is another issue. We need to fully reform our education in order to support the reforms. Something has been started, but we have to continue that direction. You shouldn't blame others. You're the ones who should do that, and nobody else will resolve your issues. Nobody will do the homework for you. But when it comes to the financial support, you should be at least at the equal stepping with your competition. If the competition has such a support, you should at least receive the same support. Otherwise, you won't be able to keep up in the long run because your competition has a support and you don't. Finally, in this first segment of questions for Mr. Angushev, when it comes to your expertise for developing the modalities of energy efficiency, I would like to hear your opinion about the challenges that the business sector that you represent has been faced with about energy efficient businesses and the perspective of the overall Macedonian economy in regard to the future tendencies of energy transformation. When we talk about energy transformation, usually we link it to energy efficiency, but they are two different things. Energy efficiency is how to use less energy, and in order to use less energy, you need technologies that consume less energy. And the second expenditure is where you spend energies day-to-day life. You need to have buildings, facilities, appliances that save when it comes to energy, and that's part of the energy efficiency, and to find ways maybe for the facilities to produce energy on their own, like with photovoltaics, etc. And that's all part of the energy efficiency. When we talk about energy transition, it's a completely different issue, and I don't think much is spoken about this, and it is discussed in a not so adequate way, and how to go from the current sources of energy into more eco-friendly sources of energy in our country, but also in the entire region. And so I'm talking about North Macedonia, Greece, because this is mainly a summit between these two countries, but also Serbia, Bulgaria, and the other countries in the region, even in Southeast Europe, mainly using coal for production of energy. In North Macedonia, it's Regbitola, which participates with about 50 or 60% share in the energy production. If we talk about the energy transition, I would go a little bit beyond. The renewable sources of energy are not that predictable, so I would talk about hydrogenization. When Western Europe is talking about energy transition, they're talking about hydrogenization. For example, take into consideration all those windmills or wind parks in the Northern Sea, in Germany, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, etc. They produce more energy that they need, and that's all done with a serious plan, so all of them would produce hydrogen from the renewable sources of energy. Why do they need that? They along the seaside, they use the process of electrolysis, they produce hydrogen, and something that hasn't been discussed a lot here is hydrogenization of the world, because in that way, practically, you're getting zero pollution, real zero pollution. It's not enough to drive electric vehicles if they use electricity that was produced by a coal power station. So, but here, basically, you use the wind. From the water, you produce hydrogen. The hydrogen is used for the vehicles. And when, at the end, the hydrogen produces electricity, and at the exhaust, you have hydrogen. And if that's done from renewable sources of energy, then you get a green hydrogen. And it's not because it has a green color, it doesn't, but because it was produced from renewable sources of energy. So Germany has been organizing conferences with the ministers of foreign affairs, Mr. Mas, and the Minister of Economy. They have a strategy where practically they explain what energy transition means. Practically, the latest information, and I can go on for hours about this, but I will stop here. Practically, the latest regulation of the EU is that both the gas pipelines where they use land gas, they would be transporting hydrogen. 20% will be hydrogen, and in that way, the dependency of the Western European countries from the oil and the land gas will be reduced regardless where they come from. And around the Europe, for example, France and Germany are leaders in this area. We already have planes, trains on using hydrogen. France, the latest information from France is that they have 10 trains using hydrogen. So when we talk about energy transition, the renewable sources of energy is an old topic. The new topic is hydrogenation. Thank Mr. Svetozar Janevski. Your many years of experience in the field, in the business sector, accompanied with your presence both at the national and international markets, is based on the use of huge number of internationally developed criteria on competition, focusing on the expert capacity of the businesses you manage. First of all, I would like to hear about the expert capacity of the Macedonian economy, having in mind that the focus in the strategy in our country is on the small and medium-sized enterprises, and especially to identify the expert component in current times. Thank you, Leonid. I was listening to Kocho. He is talking about technologies, about things that are simply could be bought on the market. The most important thing in business are people and dedication of people, the loyalty and pushing for what they need to achieve in the 21st century. Yanis mentioned why they don't sell wine in North Macedonia. There is a big competition. It's easier to sell wine in Greece than in North Macedonia, but that's something else. We will clarify these things tomorrow. When talking about what Macedonia has and Macedonia should do, you have mentioned the export activities. Today, we don't have the improvisation from the 1990s. Vlachos here, we've been traveling through history when it comes to the political and economic aspects in the region, and the topic of this panel and of this gathering, the regulatory framework. What has changed? What has changed? Probably a lot has changed. In 1998, we had a system that was managed by a young, at that time, young prime minister, and everybody thought that he would, and he thought he would rule for 50 years. And then there was another who became a businessman, and he's saying that he's a businessman, etc., etc. Now we don't have that. Showing emotions and passion to the businessman and the economy, I'm not here. But still, we do not have mutual discussion. What is Macedonia? What are the capabilities of North Macedonia? I apologize. Please do not think that I'm doing this intentively. It's by instinct. And all these things today are more or less in the entire Western Balkan, because I stayed in the Western Balkans and I still see the same people. There is a good thing by Andrich. The mentality and the people do not stop at the borders. Everything that is in the country is part of what we have inherited from the Ottoman Empire. At one point, because we are being criticized about corruption in 1998, 1990, I said that there is a lot of corruption in Macedonia, and I was complaining, and I was asked how far it goes. It's 50 or 16%, and he said at up to 25% is inherited from the bakshish in history. Yes, we want to make a change. We want to develop a system. It's difficult to build this system. We do not have the experience of the imperialistic powers in a country where the people are not aware, do not know how to build a state, because establishing laws and the implementation of laws are very important in order to be able to change things. The principle of building a state and nation in the 1990s was one of the most important elements, how to get out of that. And today we come to that point. Have we built a state? Are we fully dedicated to the state? Are we loyal to the state? Are we ready to pay the taxes? And how much my desire to have a progress and to make a profit, is it higher than the idea of developing the society and to participate in helping not only the economy but the people living in this country? So the regulatory, the legal obligations, having laws in Macedonia, because we've been monitored how to apply the principles of democracy, the market economy, the judicial system. If I look at myself and if I look at the others around me, you won't believe me that you cannot believe that in North Macedonia everything is peachy. So there should be a long process of discussing and coming to an agreement. What's most important in North Macedonia? Leonid asked me about the export. Because we are not doing well, we import 700 million euros worth of food. IMF, even a year ago, told all the countries, especially the poor countries and developing countries, that in the coming period after the pandemic, there would be a real need in this field because we do not produce food. I will just emphasize several things that my colleagues keep telling me to mention. 90% of the beef is being imported, 80% of the pork is being imported, 99% of the chicken is important, then cheese, etc. So what's the opportunity for us? We're going to build big factories and we're going to import food. And what are my habits? What are my roots? Because my roots tell me the Slavs, the Vlachs, everybody living here, we have a historic truth, and that's part of our heritage, that we are farmers. We have never had experience with factories for cars. That's something that happened many years ago in 1945 when people moved from the villages to the cities, building big industries where we cannot be competitive on the market. We, Macedonia and Tikvesh, as a Tikvesh, we export to 25 countries, and the competition is such that we cannot have big profit, but we are fighting, and slowly we are getting there. In order to be able to change, we have to change the legislation, we have to apply standards. The application of standards is going towards a direction of dealing away with the populism and having this is not anything new. It's a historic policy that we have to get separated, and to building high standards gives you the right to say that you need to produce the best possible product in the world, not in Macedonia. And for that reason, there are many things that we need to change and to agree about, because all the panelists here, they keep talking about corruption, how to change corruption. We will change it by improving the standard of the people, by changing the principles of conduct of the people working in the institutions. Then the corruption can be changed also by having a standard that will change the habits, but it has to go slowly. We cannot apply Shariat right to cut off hands and heads in order to make the point. All that will take time, but when it comes to our development, our economy, we will always have advices that are being given in regard to development, and the development is something that it's only we that can achieve. And what are our opportunities as a country? That's where we have to focus on. A couple of days ago, I was in Vienna, and Verhey said that 14 billion IPART 3, 9 billion for Western Balkans. I'm mentioning this because that assistance from EU goes towards infrastructure, green energy, and the third is human capabilities. Until we get those money, we will have no people in Macedonia, because initially we had a brain drain. Now we have non-skilled people emigrating, leaving the country. Everything we do now is to use the state-of-the-art means. We are forced to that in order to cultivate the land. That's all something we've been forced because we don't have people anymore. If you look at the birth rate of Macedonia, We used to have 6,000 per year, now 19,000. There are many things that we have to agree on here on this table. We are not further away from anybody. Serbia, Montenegro, not even Greece. Greece has had these problems until 20 years ago. Mr. Yanovsky, for a small and open economy like the Macedonian one of the most important dimensions in building its competitiveness is to close the chain of values, where new component is added, a new value, not only with linear but also domestic businesses. In this segment, where do you see the perspective of the business competitiveness of the Macedonian businesses, especially their closer regional cooperation?
Well, for the regional cooperation, we can talk, of course, but we need to develop it further on. We need to be tolerant, we need to be patient. We are still quite far from accepting that our neighbor has entered our yard. So it is difficult for us to accept foreign companies, but I am present on the first, on the second, and on the third market in the region. But what is the most important thing when we talk about added value? OECD has made a good analysis in this regard. What brings added value? The metal processing industry, the car production industry, and other types of industries have value added between 1.2 to 2.6. The agriculture and food production have 11.2. So where you need to go in order to get a greater value of the country? Will you go to 1.2 or to 11? If you consider any industry, the net exporters in Macedonia are furniture, shoes, and drinks, such as wine, brandy, and so on and so forth. So only 3 categories are net exporters in our country. Thank you very much. One of the most important segments in building competitiveness is, of course, the system of funding investments of Macedonian businesses. Mr. Gligor Bishev, as the key executive manager of Sparkasse Bank, has enormous experience in securing financial incentives to small and medium-sized companies, especially to startup companies. And for some time, he was developing also the lease financing. So I would like to hear your thoughts about the capacity of the small and medium-sized companies based on the use of such financial instruments, and what are the needs that you predict for the future? What are their needs that might be financed by the financial institutions? Well, we all know that in order to implement any business idea, you of course need to have funds. And 2 types of funds are necessary. The first one is own capital that will bear the risk, and the second type is funding by financial institutions, a bank, a leasing company, or other type of financial institutions. So for small and medium-sized companies, since they are small companies, they have small needs, usually one bank funds their needs, unlike big projects where a consortia of banks is needed. So considering the banking system in general, I believe that all banks have knowledge and funds to fund small projects, which go to maximum 5 million euros. From this point of view, the situation in the banking sector is quite favorable because the total loans are 80% from the total deposits in the banks, which means that there are 20% of unused potential And we also have a large number of available credit lines coming from abroad, especially from the European Bank on Development, that has a special credit line on energy efficiency, which supports the restructuring of companies in order to spend less energy, and there are options for receiving a grant from 15 to 20%. So when we talk about small and medium-sized companies, we need to have in mind that they present 99.5% of the total number of companies in Macedonia. So from the way of funding the good ideas will, of course, affect the economic development in the Republic of North Macedonia. We have big companies here that are drivers of the economic growth, but by rule, the small and medium-sized companies serve as suppliers of the big companies, so they are of importance on the domestic or on the foreign market. Mr. Bishop, considering the difficulties that small and medium-sized companies are facing, especially in securing a collateral, then the level of their managerial and technical skills, to what extent the credit lines that are being offered by the Macedonian banks are matched with their needs? And do you think that there should be even more specialized credit lines created in future in order the Macedonian economy to build its competitiveness? Well, what is characteristic for funding the corporate sector is that every company is a project on its own. And by rule, unlike the funding of the citizens, all loans and credits are given in a tailor-made circumstances, which means that the bank analyzes each project individually. And what we have learned in the past, especially in the period when we became independent, when the businessmen and the banks were always asking what is the collateral. Now, no businessman says, I have a collateral. All the banks want to know what are the projections for the cash flow. So from that point of view, the collateral is not the main criterion for financing the companies. Also, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IFC, and other financial institutions, and also the Macedonian Bank for Development is introducing a guarantee program in order to assist small and medium-sized companies obtain loans, and in this way reduce the credit risk for them. So the key is for you to have a good project, a good projection, and a good cash flow. Thank you very much, Minister Maricic. In continuity, the Republic of North Macedonia is investing huge efforts in order to improve the legal framework for stimulating investments, not only by foreign investors, but also by domestic investors. So the capacity for developing business environment is actually an interaction of three entities: the state, the users of those services, and the businessmen or those who make the business decisions. So in this regard, I would like to hear your opinion about the key changes that have been made in the recent years in order to develop the business environment, in order to motivate the competitiveness of the Macedonian businesses. Thank you very much, Professor Nakov. It is a great honor for me to be part of this panel with some key persons from the business sector. So, as the youngest one and the least experienced, I will try to focus on some issues related to the operation of the business sector and improving the business climate, but as a Minister of Justice. Generally speaking, I believe that the legal framework is only one segment of what the state should and must do. In the past 4 years as a government, we have done a lot. I'm sure that Mr. Andrushev can say a lot more about this. But the objective was to put the foreign and the domestic investors on the same level with regard to possibilities given to them for developing the economy. Some measures have been introduced to stimulate export, and some of the measures might have seemed contrary to the competitiveness rules, but at some point they were key for survival of the some segments of the economy. However, in the long term, the development of the processing industry should be our goal, and I believe that the Vice Prime Minister Bititi and the others have already said something about this. However, I would like to underline another aspect, and those are the three most important pillars for improving the business climate. So the legal framework is only one of the preconditions, very important one, but it is only a part of the environment. So besides the legal framework, you also need to have a strict implementation of the rule of law principle without compromises, fighting corruption, and of course independent judiciary that can deliver for the public interest but also for the benefit of the business community, in order the business community not to have obstacles to its development. In this regard, if we have these three elements in mind, the rule of law, fighting corruption, and independent and functional judiciary, I think that we can also hope to have better economy and starting the negotiations, but also functionality during the negotiations, because I had an opportunity as a coordinator of the preparatory team for the negotiations to go 33 times to Brussels for each chapter with a different team, with different representatives from the institutions, and I can tell you that there, especially in the economic chapters, which are not a few, half of those chapters directly affect different segments of the economy, and maybe more than half, but at least half are directly affecting some economic sectors or economic policies that are key for developing the market in accordance with the European standards. So during those visits, we could see that there are many open questions that could not be solved only by changing the legislation, but we need good regulatory bodies that are key for the implementation of the rule of law and fighting corruption, but also with the active involvement of the business community. Because without active involvement of the business community, we cannot have successful negotiations with the European Union. The Stabilization and Association Agreement has been a framework that has been in force for 20 years, but this is only a framework that needs to help us to make the initial steps towards the real opportunities from the European Union. If you allow me, I would only like to say a couple of things about regional cooperation. Since I have been also working on developing this framework for regional cooperation under the Berlin process, through the regional economic area, but also on the initiative for mini Schengen, our region very much needs to increase the regional cooperation. Here I refer to the countries from the Western Balkan, but also the countries that are EU members and are neighbors to the Western Balkan. Greece, Bulgaria, Slovenia, Croatia, Hungary, and so on and so forth. So we have a long way to go until we become members of the European Union. And within this long way, we cannot wait until we implement the European standards and do not do anything on regional level. So that is why I believe that it is key to give a chance to the regional economic area that is promoted by the Berlin process, related to trade, investments, opening a common market for some profiles that are very much needed in the whole region. Doctors, architects, construction workers, but also we need to give a chance and open our systems, because administration is very difficult, very problematically follows suit, so to say. When we were talking about introducing these measures or doing some common investments that could be proposed to foreign investors or to the banks, very often we saw that there are administrative problems and resistance from the institutions. So that is why we as government, we need to focus more on this. So that is why we need a political will that support this positive change. But in order to make this operational, we have to go back to the first set of values, good laws, good implementation of those laws that motivate and stimulate business, but also work for the public benefit, system that effectively fights corruption and organized crime, an independent and functional judiciary that can be trusted by the citizens and by the investors as well. Thank you very much. This was just an introduction, and I'm open for any further questions. Thank you very much, Minister. Part of today's panel is Mr. Mikhailo Vesovic, who will take part online. Good day, Mr. Vesovic. Can we hear each other? Добар ден во Скопје од Белград, дали се слушаме? Јас ке зборувам на англиски во текот на нашиот разговор. Како директор на Центарот за стратешки анализи во Стопанската комора во Република Србија, преземате длабински анализи за стратешката позиција на бизнис секторите во Србија во споредба со идните промени кои што се очекуваат со пристапување кон ЕУ. Во овој контекст сакам да го слушнам вашето мислење, кои од овие мерки, инструменти и алатки што ги користите за зголемување на конкуренцијата на српските бизниси ги сметате за најважни, и во овој контекст сакам да комбинирам малку со најновата иницијатива која што се спроведе пред една недела во однос на Комисијата на ЕУ и форумот на инвестицијски стопански комори од Западен Балкан. Тие воспоставија заедничка бизнис платформа која се нарекува 3B6 EU, чија цел е надминување на предизвиците при градењето на националната и меѓународната конкурентност. Во овој сегмент, кои се вашите очекувања, особено имајќи предвид дека во вашата стопанска комора вие обрнувате особено внимание на дигитализација, иновации и креативните индустрии? Благодарам, господине Наков. Прво сакам да му посакам добри дојде на сите во овој панел. Особено бидејќи слушнавме некои работи кои што ни даваат преглед на ситуацијата на Македонија. И прво ќе почнем со заклучокот. Сите економии во регионот имаат собствени можности да ја зголемат конкурентноста и производството. Меѓутоа, ние сме во фаза мора да се искористи ова можност на заеднички регионален пазар. Ова не е всушност политичка парадигма, бидејќи малите економии во моменталната ситуација се покажуваат како поранливи и всушност она што е генерален тренд што се случува глобално е дека транспортните трошоци растат, инпутите растат, има голема потреба да имаме безбедни логистички мрежи, особено за европската економија, кој што е наш најголем инвеститор, не само во Србија и Македонија, меѓутоа генерално во Западниот Балкан. И генерално нашата трговија е 70% поврзана со државите членки на ЕУ. Значи, во однос на тоа, може да кажеме дека најважно е ние како регион да сме достапни да прифатиме нови инвестиции кои доаѓаат како нови трендови. Со цел за да можеме да направиме такво нешто, не создаваме отделни пазари како Македонија, Србија и така натаму, туку мора да создадеме заеднички пазар кој што ќе даде доволно економски причини за компаниите да го преместат нивното производство поблиску до Европската Унија и да искористат ова можност. Во однос на ситуацијата во Србија, јас поредував со економските резултати на Македонија и горе-долу се соочуваме со истата ситуација, иако Македонија е се уште во првото тромесечие од ова година има пад на БДП, додека Србија малку побрзо се закрепнува од она што се случи. Значи, истите сектори се двигатели, тоа се рударството, енергетиката, водоснабдување, тие се нема пад, односно има пад, додека имаме шумарство, земјоделство, каде што имаме раст. Исто така, бруто инвестициите во првото тромесечие во Македонија се намалиле, додека во Србија останале на исто ниво како тие во 2019. Она што сакам да ви го кажам, дека билатералните релации меѓу Србија и Македонија оваа година ќе бидат во вредност од 1 милијарда евра. Меѓутоа, за да имаме заеднички регионален пазар, не е поентата само да ги тргнеме административните пречки или да се усогласиме со законодавството во ЕУ. Мора да имаме и цврста инфраструктура и да можеме да ги транспортираме добрата стоките најбрзо што можеме. Така што двете најважни инфраструктурни проекти со кои што се соочуваме во Македонија и во Србија е гасниот интерконектор, кој што е тековен проект, и другиот е железничкиот сообраќај кој што треба да го поврзува Солун, Скопје, Врање, Ниш, Белград и потоа ќе продолжи понатаму до Будимпешта. Се формираше и бизнис совет со цел да може да се комуницира со администрацијата на ЕУ. Благодарам господине Весовиќ, едно мало прашање за крај, како што ми кажа една од најважните дизајнери Филип Лейн ја посетил Србија овие денови. Дали може да ни објасните дека ова е знак дека ќе се инвестира, дека тој ќе инвестира во српската модна индустрија или некако вид на нова соработка? Да, текстилната индустрија расте, а Филип Лейн е познат по тоа што само тој е собственик на својата компанија, значи не е дел од конзорциум, конгломерат или така натаму. Значи нормално започнуваме со лон производство како и секогаш, а потоа се надеваме дека и ќе инвестира во иднина. Добро, сакам да им се заблагодарам на сите говорници денеска за вашата дискусија. Ви благодарам за вашето присуство.